Hey everyone, thanks again for tuning into Paranormal Now. I want to share with you quickly that a documentary film my wife and I created years ago called Born Equal, a documentary about love, is now available on Amazon Prime for free. So I hope you'll go check that out. It's a film that makes the argument for LGBTQ rights, for marriage equality, and so much more. And it follows the day in the life of a lesbian Christian couple, Renee and Kelly, and their family, and juxtaposes that with perspectives from different religions, religious authorities, researchers, doctors, including atheists, Hindu, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and so much more. And it's a really fascinating look at history and mythology as well, and how through all these different viewpoints we come to this place of acceptance and love. So I hope you'll go check the film out, and if you do enjoy it, please give it a good rating and write a positive review. I really appreciate that. It was our first film, and so this is actually a prelude to the next upcoming documentary that I'll be working on, and that is called Half Light. Now this documentary is all in paranormal, and what I'm excited about is that the lessons we've learned from the first film will apply to the second film. Born Equal is a film that we absolutely love and are proud of, and we hope to share with you, and perhaps, just perhaps, it'll make a little bit of a difference in the world. Thank you. Wherever you are and whenever you are, welcome, good souls of the planet and beyond, to Paranormal Now. I'm Alan B. Smith. Join us as we traverse the cosmic highway of paranormal portals and tantalizing turnoffs. Joining me for the first 30 minutes is Tom Warner, followed by the host of The Hidden History, and a science junkie, and a ufological researcher, and host of the Grayling Report, as well as the Micah Hanks program, the very one and only Micah Hanks. I'm very excited to be hanging out with Micah. It's a first time for me, and he covers such a wide gamut of unsolved and alternative encrypted mysteries. So that's going to be a really great conversation. So stay tuned for that. In the last half hour tonight, we will open up the call lines, and that number is 855-472-5483. And of course, you can share your thoughts during or after the show on Twitter at paranormal_now, or on Instagram at paranormalnow. And for those of you, on occasion we share images on the program. If you don't want to miss that and you're listening to this live stream on KGRA, you can jump over to KGRA's YouTube channel and Facebook page, and the live video stream populates there, so any imagery that we bring up during a show will appear there, so you can check that out. So last week we had a guest, Kevin Titus, who had said some things that in real time we were unable to fact check. And since then, there has been some questions, concerns, and challenges to what he said. And so, to be fair, we are bringing on Tom Warner, who was the accused, as it were, in those charges. And that's because Tom should have a chance to respond to things said about him. I leave it up to you, the audience, to try to be as unbiased as possible. And if you want to go back to last week's episode and listen to that segment in the last second hour, please do so. We'll play a little bit of a clip of that tonight, and then we'll let Tom respond. So very quickly, Tom, welcome to Paranormal Now.
Alan, thank you, and thank you, KGRA, for giving me this opportunity to come back to fight these things that were said about me, that were both just vindictive and outward lies. But thank you.
Absolutely. Now, to be open and clear, I am a supporter of the UFO Monument Park. I have been friendly and had a relationship with Tom Reed for the better part of 2 years. And so there's a certain level of trust and rapport that was built up there. But that said, my job is to let this be an open platform, no matter what,
Right.
and let people
Right.
share their story. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play a little bit of the audio clip, and then after we're done listening to that, Tom Warner will respond. So this is a bit of Kevin Titus last week. And I'm glad things are getting back together. Do you know when the actual the stone monument will that be returned anytime soon?
Okay, I'll give you some updates on that. Number one, we know that it was removed illegally from the site, and actually, to make a long story short, the monument actually was placed by the city, and they put it there and said that's where they wanted it, and that's what they did. We didn't do it, and they left it there. And, well, what had happened was later on, I won't mention some names, Tom Reed or Melanie might have told you, some of the people from Sheffield Power. They decided to remove it in the middle of the night after we had posted. Get this, we own that land. Tom Reed, it's called UFO Park Monument Incorporated, LLC. Everybody's involved in it. It's private property. And they came over and we posted do not trespass all over the our property. And do you know something? The next morning they had torn down our signs, which they knew was illegal. They also then removed with a tractor and took the monument away. They never did tell us where it is, but I did find out, and this I will tell you, that I had heard that Tom Warner, who a lot of us do not have any respect for, decided that he'd get with some Canaan Falls Village, Connecticut people to try to hide it in a storage unit over in Canaan. When I found out of it as a judge, I already went down there and told them they are to remove that and bring it. If it's over here, bring it back to Massachusetts, or I'm going to be charging everybody with felonies, including Tom Warner. And Tom Warner they actually have a kind of an outstanding warrant looking for him, which he come back in Connecticut for something.
Really? Okay, I'm going to pause there, Tom, and allow you to respond. There is some more, but we'll see how this goes because we only have so much time.
Right. We'll pick up our pace on this. And by the way, I have a little echo back on your feed there. Okay, first of all, last Saturday night, I received a message that it was a little disturbing. It says you have a warrant for your arrest. I was so disturbed by that. I knew I didn't have a warrant for my arrest. I immediately called the Great Barrington Police Department and explained what the situation was. There was a guest on your program who said I had a warrant for my arrest. And, of course, they looked it up, and he says, there's no warrant for your arrest. This has to be a scam. So the next day I went to the Connecticut State Police and filed a complaint that this particular person, what he had said, and that there was a warrant for my arrest and that I had stolen this monument and he was going to charge me with a felony. The Connecticut State Police and the town of Canaan, the village of Falls Village, which is part of Canaan, Connecticut, informed me that Kevin Titus is not a judge. He's a justice of the peace. He is not a judge. He doesn't have any judicial standing whatsoever. A justice of the peace in Connecticut can marry people. So this whole charade of him going around and saying, I am a judge on the program, Judge Titus, that is a bunch of baloney lies.
Well,
period.
I may have mentioned it to you earlier in our conversations off the air, but the title of judge, you don't necessarily have to go to law school, pass the bar exam, and all that jazz, right? There's another lower court level.
No, listen to this. In Connecticut, to be a judge, you have to be a judge, not a justice of the peace. That's covering up. You have
to get that title.
Well, I don't. Oh, to get the title of justice of the peace, anybody can have that.
Do you?
However, Kevin was not a judge, ever a judge, and he could not be a judge. And if any of you did a background check on him, you'd know why he couldn't be a judge. Now, that being said, let's go talk about the monument, okay? First of all, I want to say this. I have full respect for Tom Reed. I backed Tom Reed when we first met. The reason I backed Tom Reed was when he told me about his father and the circumstances about his father, I said, Tom, I back you. When the Historical Society came to me as a local historian and they said, we're considering bringing Tom's documents into the collection. And they said, we heard that you knew about it. I said, that's true. And he says, how would you know? I said, because on the same night it happened to me. Now, because I'm respected in the town and I'm respected by the historical committee, I went to school with many of them, or they knew my parents. It carried a lot of weight. On the day that Tom's letter went into the Historical Society, my letter went in the Historical Society. But I didn't want to make a big deal of it. I had no intention of even talking about my case. I did it because I wanted to back Tom Reed. Period. That's it. So Tom had the monument. It was made. We don't know who exactly made it. I don't care who made it. The monument was too close to the bridge. They said, hey, look, you got to move it. Tom Reed called me and he says, look, I'm in Tennessee. Can you go down and speak to them and see about the placement of the monument? As a former planning board member from the town of Great Barrington, I agreed to do so. The town also of Sheffield accepted that I would be down there and see where this was marked. When she started talking about the rule of law of where that monument could be, immediately I knew it was a mistake. But I figured, okay, we'll take the best spot we can get for Tom, and that was it. And I did the best I could for Tom. It was a good location. It took a while. The park was slowly built over time. The park, they immensely cleaned that park up to make it look really beautiful. It really looks. I mean, it looked trashy before, honestly. You wouldn't want to go sit down now. It looks really beautiful. I admit that. So the monument was put in. Everybody was happy. Benches were made. People were making donations to this park. And then they had to do work on the bridge. On the bridge itself, they had to put a roof. In doing so, by law, they had to fill out a building permit. In doing so, they had to do a survey. And when they did the survey said it's on town property, period. So then this back and forth between Tom and the town of Sheffield started. Now, just prior, let me fill you in right what happened and then comment, okay? So then we're all going to be filmed in Unsolved Mysteries. Unsolved Mysteries asked me, would I go to the town and say, look, hold off on this. We're going to film and would be okay to hold off on it. And the town agreed. Because otherwise they were just going to do it right before we filmed, and that would not have been a terrible idea. So they kept the peace until after it was filmed, and then they came. And last effort, the town says, we're taking this out of here. It's on our property. And it became a dispute between Tom and the town of Sheffield. But listen, okay? So I was asked prior to the show being filmed, after it was filmed, prior to that being aired of this year, July 1st, would I write a letter? At the time, I had a non-disclosure agreement with Netflix not to talk about anything connected with anything to do with 1969 or anything to do with anybody that was involved in the show. And I agreed to. And I agreed to do that. In the meantime, I was told, look, he's holding it up. He could solve this in a day. I went to the town of Sheffield and I got my butt thrown out of there trying to get that monument back. So there was nothing I could do about it.
What do you mean you got your butt thrown out of there?
They literally threw me out of the building. And it's like they just said, sit there.
With what recourse? I mean,
they locked the door and there was only one exit out, and they said, we're not talking to you. You have to leave. That was it.
Okay, so two questions.
So I still had
wait, Tom, just hold it right there. So the township, they waited until Unsolved Mysteries filmed and then decided to make their move. So what's their motivation? If they thought the right thing to do was to make their move and remove the monument, why not just do it right away? What's their motive of letting unsolved mysteries come in and film? Do you know what I mean? Like seems like they want
first of all, they knew unsolved mysteries coming out, doing a show was clearly going to be seen by 20 million people. So that it was a good reflection on Sheffield.
So they weren't
looking for a fight at that point. They were just
So
go ahead, film.
So they did see that there was some positive PR aspect to it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I really do. Yeah, I would say so. But on the other hand, you got to remember in town government, you have all your officials, but you also have a legal component of a town government. And when town council says you are to do this, that's it. Whether it was in Great Barrington or Sheffield.
Well, okay, yeah. So
that's legal. That's legally how it works.
You said Tom invited you. And my understanding was, as you know, that that you are a deputy, and on behalf of Tom Reed, you are obligated to witness the installation of the monument, take pictures, and send a letter to the Department of Public Works.
Well, no, he never asked that. He asked me to go down and try to get the best blood. But I was never deputized. Okay,
there's no legal document signing
no, nothing like that. He asked, could you go down and sign? I was just, look, Tom and I were pretty tight back then. Mm-hmm. I have nothing against Tom. I have nothing against Melanie. None of them. I was happy that they told their stories because it was a relief that so many people had their story to tell. I mean, look, I don't care if he has a monument. Actually, the current plaque that they have down there, twice as nice, really. I'd tell them keep the monument, really. It's not.
Well, I mean, that's he said, she said. Everyone has their opinion on.
That's my personal opinion.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. I was not deputized. No. I did him a favor. Okay.
So here's the thing.
I did him a favor. I was trying to help him out.
What I understand Kevin Titus was saying in the.
Let's get back to Kevin because that was the real issue here.
And what he was saying in a faulty way was that because, according to just go with me for now, okay? According to what he believes, because you were deputized, that you were sort of negligent, right? You didn't do what you were charged to do.
100% no bullshit, no.
Right, and that's why he
bullshit.
said that.
Now let me tell you something here, okay?
Wait. So that's why he said no. That's fine, but that's why he said that charges could be brought against you and that sort of thing.
Wrong.
But the felony thing was totally fabricated. Is that correct?
That felony thing was total bullshit lies. Bullshit. Okay? Plain and simple. It was deceitful what he said. It was on purpose because look, they were looking out to harm me because why are they putting me down? Why? Because I had an event the same night?
That's the question.
Because I was seen in a UFO beam, the first to be seen in a UFO beam. Before anybody?
Well, no, but that's why. That's what I'm so confused about all this is like what's the motivation, right? Why does any one person want
why
to
does Kevin
hurt another?
Why does Kevin Titus pretend that he's a judge when he knows damn well he's not? And why did Kevin Titus say I took the monument and it's hidden in Sheffield when he knows it's a complete lie? The town of Sheffield has it. It was in the papers. He knows it. Tom Reed knows it. Right. So why is this a discussion? It's a total fabrication lie against my character.
But what would be the motive there? That's what I.
What do you think? What do you think's the motive?
Well, if it's money, that doesn't make sense.
Why would he have the motive? It's obvious. Why are they turning around saying, "Oh, that guy's he's no one respects him" and all that? That's a bunch of baloney. Go watch Unsolved Mysteries if you have a problem with it.
Well, one thing we don't like on Paranormal now is character assassination, and that's why it was important that you came on here.
Right.
That you look if someone makes charges about something that someone did or is guilty of that I can't fact check, that's one thing. But if But if you're character assassinating someone, that's something that doesn't rely on facts. That's someone's opinion, and we don't want that a part of Paranormal.
You're absolutely right. So I'll tell you this: you call up the Falls Village, Connecticut town hall and ask for the town clerk and ask if Kevin Titus is a judge, and they'll give you the same answer the Connecticut State Police told me. No, he's not a judge. Okay. So going on these programs and say, in the program with Judge Kevin Titus, it's like, did anyone look? It says he's a justice of the peace.
Okay, so
that's fact. That's fact. So I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna argue over the fact.
I have to be careful about what I say because I don't have evidence in my hand to support.
Here's what we know for fact, and in the papers, you can go look it up. The town of Sheffield took the monument in a dispute with Tom Reed, saying that they had a cease and desist letter against Tom Reed, and they were taking it after so many days. Okay? They took it. So take it up with the town of Sheffield. I didn't have anything to do with it.
So you had no responsibility to send those images?
Zero. No, those images were sent to Tom Reed, and he lost them. And
so where are the images now that you took?
They're with Tom Reed. I had them on my last computer. I asked a computer expert to try to take, because I couldn't, my computer crashed, which was a Macintosh, which was very unusual. Mm-hmm. An expert tried to take everything off the hard drive. All the photos and all the files that said Reed UFO or any UFO files were deleted from my file. And I don't know.
So they're just gone completely?
Gone. All my photos gone. All my family photos, everything gone.
What about did you use a camera or did you take it on your phone? Or did you back it up?
I back it up. It was on my computer. I didn't think I sent them to Tom. When it happened, take a picture of it. Here's the X. Here you go, Tom. Tom's happy as can be. Okay, we got this. Tom lost his copy, too. It's not just Tom Warner losing a copy. Tom Reed lost it. That's Tom Reed's responsibility, not mine. I can't.
Right.
No.
Look, that's...
So you should ask the town of Sheffield. Go ask Sheffield. That's what you need to do. That's who you have to be asking those questions. Who has the monument? Tom Warner has the monument? Come on.
That would be
5,000-pound monument? Be real.
And I would be asking the town Sheffield because, according to you, Tom should have sent them because you sent them to Tom. But now my understanding is
I sent those to Tom. Whatever Tom did with them, that's his business.
But was it on... My understanding that it was like a timeline thing, right? Like it had to be sent by a certain time so that whenever you did send them, it was too late. Is that correct?
No.
Okay.
No. They put the monument down. The monument move was from up near the actual bridge, and then it was moved down, pound to spot. We took the tape out. I said, "Is this all right here?" Yeah, it's fine. Will you mark it with an X, please? Yes. Took pictures. I sent them to Tom that day. Period. That day.
Okay.
That's
so
it.
another
he
remark.
Did with him, I didn't know. There wasn't even a big deal made of it. In fact, there wasn't even a big deal of it until the town did a survey by Mike Parsons. It was Kelly Granger Parsons from Great Barrington. You might want to ask him. Go ahead and ask him. You should do this research before someone comes out and says some baloney BS lie that I took a 5,000-pound monument and then I had it hidden. And by the way, if Kevin was a judge, he would have been fine. He would have had to have criminal charges against him because a judge can't come out and threaten arrests on people. Be real.
No, we don't have time to play the full clip from
his
comment last week. But
people can go back and look at it.
Tom, wait. So he does refer to some issues with Netflix and him being cut out of that.
And now, you know what? And let me tell you something. When Netflix goes, they fact check every single fact that's in a thing. Okay? Now, when they fact check and they find out you tell one little itty bitty lie, you're out.
And okay, is that Tom? Wait, is that what you're saying? He lied, and then that's why they let him go.
That I was told that by somebody. Whether it's true or not, you need to call Netflix and ask Netflix why he was out. Well, if you want to know the answer,
unsolved mysteries specifically. Yeah.
No, Netflix owns those programs of Unsolved Mysteries. It's produced by Netflix. You would have to
Okay.
speak to Netflix executive why Kevin was not in that program, okay?
Okay. And did you ever email or contact Netflix and say anything disparaging about them?
About who?
About Tom Reed or
I could
Kevin
care
Titus?
less.
Or
I could care less.
But so you never contacted, or did you contact Unsolved Mysteries?
On what?
I don't know.
No, you're
'Cause-
asking me a question. Be specific.
Right. Did you say anything disparaging about?
No, I don't
about
disparage.
them?
I don't disparage anybody.
Okay. So that's good. I'm glad you said that. You know, it's good to get that out there.
I backed up Reed. I backed up his story. I sort of had hints on Kevin, but I didn't say anything. I was told about Kevin later. Did I know he wasn't going to be in that show? Absolutely.
So this is what I'm going to say, Tom.
I knew he wasn't going to be on the show because someone told me. So, and it wasn't from Netflix.
Okay, so here's the thing. Originally, just so everybody knows, you were not going to respond to any of these charges, and you wanted to kind of stay above the fray. But because some of them were so, particularly the felony issue, were so false, that
Right.
you felt compelled to come on here and comment, and that's awesome. What I want to say is that what I love and why I'm such a supporter of the UFO Monument Park is because it is a beautiful, serene place. That is representative of I think a very important ufological event, and I think that it's a wonderful way to go and celebrate. It's now, communal.
I agree. But the park was designed. The park is about Tom Reed's event, and it's beautiful, and the park's beautiful, and he did a great job. If you saw this place before, it was you wouldn't want to go there, really. He did a great job. I mean. Okay, now,
and you helped in that.
Here's the thing.
Process.
Well, yeah, I didn't. I just helped them on the monument thing, and I spoke on his behalf. When it first came out, they vandalized his thing like you couldn't believe. And behind the scenes, people were coming to me, and I said, "Back off, this guy. This story's true." And I defended Tom right from the get-go. I mean, I took infinite crap behind the scenes for that guy.
And so, well, this is where I'd like to.
But now let me finish.
Wait, Tom. Let me just say this because the clock is ticking.
Yeah,
so,
I know, and I
think
that
that
a few more things.
Okay. So I think this is very important. I think that if there is a way, and I understand, you know, when people prick each other, we get sensitive, and you know, especially when totally unfounded things are said. Right. Okay, now, but if I could at least say, if there's any way that people could find a way to communicate, you and Tom Reed maybe start there, have a conversation, and figure out how you can put down your swords and come together.
I don't have a sword up against Tom.
Okay, but metaphorically speaking.
No, I know. I'm saying this. Everybody that was on that program did a wonderful job. Jane Green, Jane Shaw, everyone, including those who haven't even been didn't make the cut or weren't interviewed. Everyone did a great job because here's what. The story of that night was not about Tom Reed. It wasn't about Tom Warner. It was about a couple towns where people had intimate things that happened to them with a UFO. Now, look, was mine any more important than Tom? No. Was Tom's any more important than mine? Right. No, not at all. It was about a UFO event that happened in Great Barrington and there. But that's not the only place this thing took place. But the TV show was, how did that affect the community? And it affected it because people didn't want to talk, and how it affected individuals such as myself and Tom Reed growing up, and how did Jane Shaw feel about it, and how did Melanie feel about it, and it went into their personal lives to express how they felt. Okay? That's why. That's it. It wasn't about one person. People got upset about Tom's Park because of this reason. And this is what people tell me here, because you got to understand, I live here all my life. And I'm here all the time. And I get this, it's only about Tom Reed. But it wasn't just about Tom Reed. So when the show came out, there was this belief the show was going to be focused on the bridge and Tom's records, whatever he had to present. Mm-hmm. And there was a little bit of upsetness there because that's not how the story was told. But that was decided by Unsolved Mysteries and Netflix. That didn't have anything to do with me.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly can't comment on any of that, except, like I'd said earlier, my, because Tom has been on the show a number of times.
Right.
KGRA, myself, or
I was
supporters
on.
of the
Listen,
park.
I was on interviews with Tom before too.
Right,
And
and
I've
so
done interviews.
I always saw him as inclusive of Melanie or yourself or other people who had that.
Why I'll ask you this then, why would he write if in a thing after Martin Willis's show in his blog? It's the only place in all the interviews I've done from Las Vegas to London that had any negative things to say about me. And in the end, he wrote something to the effect of, and you can go back on Martin's, YouTube or whatever. And in the end, he said, if you want the real truth, go to Tom Reed Park, blah, 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 blah. So what's that implying? If everybody says I'm lying and I'm just copying Tom Reed's thing, that's bullshit. It really is.
I do want to show you this, Tom, because I thought that you would appreciate this.
Go ahead.
I asked Kevin last week if he had images of the corn stalks. So Tom Reed sent me pictures that apparently were on site, and they were not 18 foot, but around 14, I believe, is what the correct number was supposed to be. And this is a crop circle.
Right.
I
did hear about the crop circle. That was seen first, and a guy named Mario Gandolfo, who was friends with Tom, found the crop circle, and he flew out from LA to do all these pictures on it.
Yeah.
I actually we took a thing. They were only 8 feet tall. Is it possible corn gets to 12 feet? Yeah. 18 feet? 18 feet is taller than the bridge.
Okay, well, I think we both agree
it
wasn't
a whopper.
I think we both agree it wasn't 18 feet, but they were extraordinarily large, so that we can.
Yeah. But 3 feet long ears of corn, I've never seen it, but that's okay.
All right,
Tom, I didn't care.
So Tom, this is it. I'm gonna have to have you. I'm gonna have to have you wrap it up. Do you have anything that you want to say before we bring Micah Hanks on and let you go?
Well, that's nice. And I'm going to tell you, truth is like cream; it always rises to the top. Just as lies and deceit sink like a rock in water. And those lies that the supposed judge, who's not a judge, who attacked me personally, was disgusting. And I have nothing against Tom Reed. I have nothing against Melanie. I'm glad they all told their story. That's great. I have my story to tell. I wrote my book. That's it. All
right. And I know that you don't want to come off like you're plugging, so I will be fair and do no. I will be fair and do it for you.
You don't have to plug me. No, you don't have to plug me. It's all right, man.
You can go to tomwatercolors.com. It's fine.
I don't need to plug myself on your program. I came on here to defend myself against serious charges that will be answered. And there's going to be more coming out. Anybody wants to use him as Judge Kevin Titus, go ahead.
Well, so this is what I'll say.
While you're at it, what you should do is this. Go do a background check if you think. I don't have any arrests on me.
And this is my recommendation to all parties involved. Do not go on programs like this, and don't use us to make your case against other people.
I agree 100%. And by the way, I just want to say thank you to Tom Reed. I think he did a great job. I think he continues to do a great job. Talking about UFOs. Same with Melanie. Same with all of them. It takes a lot of courage to come on these programs. Believe me.
Indeed. All right, Tom. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I'll see you around.
Okay, Alan. Thanks a lot. And you have a great night. Okay. Look forward to your next guest. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. All right. So I'm going to just jump on here and bring Micah Hanks on because we are running really tight with the time. So we're going to skip this break. Micah, how are you, brother?
Good to be here with you, man. I hope we're coming through loud and clear. I did a show the other night, and I forgot to, unmute my microphone. That's a rookie mistake, isn't it?
But I still make it.
It happens.
It is. So how are you? Thank you for joining us. I think a while back, Bill was like, "Hey, you should get Micah on," and then it just never happened. So I'm glad when I reached out to you, you said yes. For those listening, Micah Hanks is a podcaster and host of a couple now, right? Micah, you've got the Micah Hanks Show, and then you have the Grellian Report as well. So Micah Hanks, with more than a decade in podcasting, travel, writing, and research, and he does and he studies history and science, Micah Hanks has more than just a passion for knowledge. His study of world history, culture, and philosophy over the years have helped shape his nonpartisan, keyword, outlook on current events, and always with a nod to the lessons history can teach us. Be sure to visit Micah's blog for more of his writing, research, and ideas. Micah is a longtime advocate for scientific research into unidentified aerial phenomena, UAPs, more commonly known as UFOs, which I still prefer. He is an affiliate member of the Scientific Coalition of UAP Studies, SCU, as well as a frequent commentator and writer on the subject, and maintains an interest in the history and possible scientific explanations for aspects of the phenomena. You can learn about some of Micah's UAP research here and here. Those are links that you can't see because I'm just reading them. Micah's other interests include space studies, zoological mysteries, and unusual phenomena in nature. A, quote, hopeful skeptic. He advocates a critically minded approach to the study of these subjects. So, Micah, tonight I did want to talk to you about some of your work into the pre-Clovis archaeological site that you had done a short documentary on. So if anybody's curious, you can find that on YouTube. And, we haven't covered much of, quote unquote, forbidden history, hidden history on Paranormal Now. So I know we can talk about a lot of the other topics that you cover, but I'd like to find out, how did you get interested in this specific site, and what excites you about this site in particular?
Certainly. Well, there's a lot to cover there. Probably going back, ever since I was a child, I've always been interested in history, and not just for the sake of being, contrarian, but I've always just had an interest, I guess, in the idea that there are aspects of science and history that generally are not accepted within the so-called, paradigm of modern accepted science, consensus, scientific opinions. Now, again, I try to operate, layman though I am, or avocationalist, as I would say. That's a term that's certainly become near and dear to my heart since becoming involved with archaeology. And that merely means dedicated amateur. Again, being the amateur that I am, I nonetheless try to operate within the framework of accepted science. I'm not someone who places myself in any way outside of them. What troubles me, however, is that when we do have discoveries for which we might say there is an abundance of clear scientific evidence, nonetheless, they seem to fall outside of the expectations of people within various different groups within academia, and therefore they are not generally accepted. And that brings us to the site you're talking about, which is the Topper site. But again, we happened to have filmed there, and in fact, my team and I are working on another similar documentary about another site which is far less controversial, but no less significant in terms of helping us understand Paleo-Indian cultures and interactions, and their way of life essentially here in North America during the late Pleistocene. But with regard to the Topper site, since you asked about it, I have a broad interest in pre-Clovis, or what some archaeologists now prefer to call before or earlier than Clovis archaeology in North America. Now, it was the longest held contention that, Clovis was the benchmark in terms of the earliest arrival of humans in North America.
For a long time, yeah.
Yeah, but before that, it's quite interesting because we also see that, as recently as the, teens and 20s and 30s, that there were anthropologists. Well, even after that, for decades after that, they would continue to dispute this idea that there had been people here earlier. But around this time, again, we first have, of course, the discoveries at Folsom, New Mexico, which identifies, of course, the type site known as the Folsom, culture. We also have and that, by the way, discovered by a cowboy, George Bajunkin, who was African American. And so, there's quite a rich legacy, behind this story. We also have James Ridgely Whiteman, despite his name. He was an indigenous American child who had, again, maybe 17, 18 years old, not really a child, I guess, teenager. But he had begun discovering what he called warheads near Clovis, New Mexico. He tried to get the Smithsonian involved. There were scientists who came and they actually looked at some of what Whiteman found, they weren't very impressed, but eventually there was excavation carried out at a site called Blackwater Draw, which unequivocally established the presence of, the Clovis culture as we recognize it in America. So that was, in short, very, very short form, how we established that there was indeed a human presence in North America during the last ice age. And despite those two discoveries, this is what's important to remember. Aleas Hrdlicka, with the Bureau of Ethnology, at the Smithsonian, seemed to have gone to his grave maintaining that there was no evidence for, quote unquote, what he called Ice Age man in the Americas. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't accept it because it fell outside of his accepted paradigm. Well, right. By the, at least the 70s, but maybe earlier than that, there were some instances where, there were some archaeological discoveries which temporally and spatially seemed to suggest that there might be an earlier presence in the Americas. And just like we saw before, you'd think we'd learn the lesson that history teaches us. But no, of course, the attitude had been, no, there couldn't be an earlier than Clovis presence. We've already pushed that time scale back to around 13,000 years ago. We don't want to go any further than that. Well, there was a remarkable pair of discoveries that both occurred right around 1972, 1973, where we had in America, around Pennsylvania, we had Washington County, Pennsylvania, J.M. Adavasio, a tremendous, truly a giant in the field of archaeology, and a gentleman who I've had the pleasure of interviewing 2 times now, and actually went and spoke with him there at the site we're about to talk about. He began excavations at Meadowcroft Rock Shelter, as it's known in Pennsylvania. It was a field school. It was an opportunity to teach. But what they ended up finding was when they reached the Clovis horizon, they keep going down deeper in this very arguably one of the most well scientifically controlled archaeological digs in America at that time, or up until that time ever, really. Mm-hmm. And they keep going deeper, and they find, sure enough, not only evidence of human activity, but they find a distinctive reworked projectile point, known, of course, now as the Miller Point. But that wasn't the only site in America, or in the Americas, I should say, that was being observed at that time and excavated. We also had, yet again, one of the most influential archaeologists he has come to be known as in really the history of American archaeology, Tom Dillehay, who was working a site in South America called Monte Verde. And at Monte Verde, he was also excavating and finding a absolutely unequivocal earlier than Clovis presence. I also had the pleasure of, on account of the hard work of my colleague Jason Pentrail earlier this year, who managed to line up the interview, we spoke with Dr. Dillehay too. So you talk about changing a paradigm. These two guys at the same time were working on different, in different regions of the Americas, North and South America, but were finding very similar sites in terms of their implications. And they were met with a lot of pushback first. It made things very difficult. Now, those were the sites that really established what we know as pre-Clovis, or again, as some prefer to call it today, earlier than Clovis. But then you get to sites like the one that we filmed our documentary about in Allendale County, South Carolina, Topper. This site, beginning, I guess, in probably the 1990s, but there are still field schools conducted there and adjacent to it today.
I just want to jump in here, Mike, and let everybody know that the link to this documentary and more information is at micahhanks.com, MICAHHANKS.com. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Alan. I appreciate that. Yes, the site in question, this is a very controversial site because, again, we had Dr. Albert Goodyear, who I'll never forget the first time we met together. Jason, my colleague who I aforementioned, with the 7 Ages Research Associates, he and I are co-founders of this organization. Again, avocationalists who volunteer on sites. We work with, real accredited archaeologists, but in the furtherance of trying to understand the history of the Americas and, anything else. We love all archaeology all around the world, wherever it happens. But we went to see Dr. Goodyear. He was kind enough to meet us there at the University of South Carolina at Columbia. And we sit down to talk, and he sits there with us and goes, you think maybe we could walk across campus and get a coffee first? I'm a little choked up, and I said, you had me at coffee.
Oh, are you a coffee fanatic too, Micah?
Oh, of course, yes.
Oh, God bless your soul, man, because I live and die by this.
Yes, sir. That's me too. Although, unfortunately, I'm not able to drink it as much in the evenings just because then I'll be just how I am right now all night and never sleep. So anyway, Dr. Goodyear wanted to walk across campus. I'll never forget that walk, just talking with him about, there is perhaps an undiscovered history in North America. And again, this isn't a bunch of woo-woo or craziness. This is, again, one of the most respectable archaeologists I've ever come to know, who has taught a couple of generations of archaeologists. Now he's retired himself. But again, a guy who was brave enough also to, when he was excavating at this topper site we're talking about, they reached the Clovis horizon, and they say, well, we're here. Let's see what happens if we go lower. Let's see what we find. And I'll mention, it's not easy to do that. People think this is just digging in the dirt. When you have this very compacted fluvial sand dating back to the Pleistocene, that again, in layman's term, we're just talking about the Ice Age. You've got this cement-like compacted strata at that layer. It is not easy to dig through. It is literally like cement. And so it was very laborious, but they go down and they do begin to find evidence of human working of stone. And this takes about three shapes, really. I really two, but I'm going to designate three. One is what Dr. Goodyear calls a bend break. And this is essentially very
bend, like B-I-N-D?
B-E-N-D, just like if you take a bend, okay. you take a stone, a little flimsy piece of rock, and you bend it. Okay, gotcha. A bend break essentially is where you have taken a stone and broken to make a sheer face, and this is used as a very crude kind of shaver or scraper rather. There was also a artifact that was removed from much lower strata called affectionately Big Red. Big Red was just a large piece of Allendale County chert. Okay, chert is a wonderful stone. And, of course, anyone who has ever tried flint knapping will probably know this. But for general purposes of this conversation, it's a stone that fractures, I believe it's called conchoidally. If you've ever seen, like, for instance, where a BB gun or something, hits glass and it leaves sort of a circular impression where the glass is fractured away in like a circular impression like that, a conical circular impression. Same kind of a thing. That's how flint, but again, chert, as we would refer to it in this region, that's how it fractures when it's broken. This piece of stone, it's not an artifact in the way that you would imagine like a projectile point, or something along those lines. What we see on this hunk of stone is simply multiple different fracture points which show repeated mechanical striking in an effort to try and break off portions of this stone for use in very simple weapon or tool manufacture. What's significant about that is that, some have argued, well, it's possible that rock had just been tumbled in a creek bed for maybe, thousands of years, and those same sorts of fractures could have occurred. You don't see that very often. And again, the idea that it would occur in multiple different fracture zones on a single large hunk like that is almost, I would actually venture to say, and I know that Dr. Goodyear would agree, that's impossible for that to occur in nature. What it must express, Alan, is that we're looking at something that somebody took and they were taking a rock and they were hitting in different regions multiple times in multiple different areas. And
that's how they break it. So the stone is like this, and they take another stone and tap it.
Yep, they're taking a rock and they're trying to knock off.
And so there's on that same piece, there's multiple cracks that you think that wouldn't likely not occur in nature.
They would not likely occur in nature, even in a very high energy site. Now, again, the argument, and this is a fair argument, that the site where Topper is, which is along the Savannah River, it is on a bank going down to the river, and at various times, in flooding periods, especially when we were seeing a lot of actual glacial meltwater runoff during the late Pleistocene, as we are leaving the ice age and we're entering the Holocene, and the ice caps are melting at this point, right? I mean, that water has to go somewhere. And so at various times throughout history, there would have been a tremendous amount of water coming through this region. And back to your original point, brief aside, you asked, how did you really get into this? I met a guy named Randall Carlson a number of years ago. Randall and I are still good pals, but Randall, of course, he's, done a lot of work with Graham Hancock. They are more sort of, I guess, in what you would call the quote unquote fringe or alternative camp. But Randall, raises some very good points about the dynamics of what was happening at the end of the Ice Age. And so when I first got to know Randall, I remember thinking to myself, this guy is really onto something. Little did I know I'd be working with a lot of archaeologists in just the next few years that really bespoke the same kind of, geological interests that he had. And this all has to do with this cataclysmic period that might have occurred right there at the end of the Ice Age. So, there's a big story going on here. But coming back to Topper, it is on a hillside, sloping down to a river that at various times, as we were exiting the Pleistocene, there certainly would have been a lot of flooding, and, flooding can still occur there today. So in terms of the energetic potential for stones to be moved around, that's certainly there. But you don't go down and pick up hunks of rock all the time that have multiple fracture zones that seem to be indicative of human activity, like what they found at Big Red. And the further importance here, too, is that, again, you find all this stuff in a single area, an archaeological site where at the Clovis boundary, they found Clovis artifacts. You go back further up, more recently in time, Archaic period, they're finding archaic artifacts, woodland era, so again, you find in association with the expected periods in the stratigraphy. You're going to find your Archaic, you're going to find your Clovis. You don't find a bunch of Clovis mixed up in the lower strata. You don't find a bunch of woodland stuff mixed up in the Clovis. What that means is that each era, that relates to a different period in American history is where it is expected to be found at Topper. And that was all maintained very well. So when they go down deeper, some have argued, if it wasn't this, a stone being tossed around in a Pleistocene river and getting knocked around, this could be something that was worked by human hands, but it must have come from an upper strata and it over time made its way down into a lower strata. There's no evidence of that at Topper. There's no evidence. I recently spoke with Dr. Doug Sane, who's a grad student who began working at Topper there and went on to obtain his PhD, and who has done very remarkable work looking at the bend breaks that we've talked about. And, he says there is no evidence of what we would call in archaeology redeposition, But I mentioned that there was a third kind of artifact that I would refer to, which technically was one of these bend breaks, but this is a more important one. Because essentially, imagine if you take a piece of stone and you break it like that and you make a little sharp face that you could use as a tool. And then you take another little stone and you start popping off little areas so that you make a very, very, very small, almost kind of a hooked point, right? You're essentially just making like a very sharp, almost needle type point on the edge of this stone. Well, one of those was found in this lower Pleistocene strata as well, where again, they call it a graver spur. This would have been used literally for engravings or for making precision cutting into leather or hide. They find one of these, and even a notable skeptic, Dr. Michael Waters of Texas A&M University, looked at this graver spur and absolutely did not dispute the fact that it shows the essential, mechanical, evidence of flint napping as we know it. To create this very sharpened little tool. So, even those who have been very critical of the idea of a human presence at Topper prior to Clovis have acknowledged that, what comes out of these lower strata certainly appears to be, the work of human hands.
Really quick, the idea is, and I was going to ask you this, was that besides the bending point, right? Those artifacts. So you always want to know, what else is there? And that's what you're saying, right? There's more than just the bending break artifacts. Right. Okay.
Yes. Some have been a little critical of the idea that, the bend, break, or even Big Red, can we really say these are artifacts? Again, once you have a graver spur that shows what could only have been the working of human hand to create a little sharpened point using for graving or for cutting, we get well outside the idea that, this can be explained naturally. So the Topper prehistory site there in Allendale County, it's going to remain controversial, despite the fact that, again, we might say that some of the artifacts retrieved from there may convey a presence as early. Okay, we're going to go as far back as we dare, and this is farther than most would ever dream, maybe to 60,000 years ago, which raises a number of questions. But on the nearer side of what's accepted in modern archaeology, we're looking at, let's say 16 to 20,000 years, okay? Well, 16,000 years old is roughly the same age of the Miller Point that was found at Meadowcroft Rock Shelter by J.M. Adavasio that we mentioned earlier. 20,000 years provenance, that's not that old. When we compare that to recent recoveries from the Galt site in Texas, where we have optically stimulated luminescence dating, which very strongly suggests about a 20 to 21,000 year old presence with very clear artifacts below the Clovis strata. It's obviously becoming the case where, there are multiple sites throughout the Americas.
Right. And why would there be a more clear layer below the Clovis strata? You would think the further back you go, right, the less distinct an artifact is, right? It makes it more difficult to track where humans have been. Or is that not the case?
It just depends. I mean, really, from one site to another, those dynamics can change a lot. For instance, if you have a fantastic archaeological site, but it's in a creek bed or a former creek bed where there's going to be a lot of alluvial deposits, water's coming through there and it's changing, flooding may be occurring and it's changing the dynamics of that site. You may not have a great state of preservation, whereas a site like Meadowcroft Rock Shelter, where you have a rock overhang, a reentrant, I think is what they call this in geology. And then you have, sedimentary layers that when it rains, of course, some water, and naturally over time, gravity is going to do its thing and it's going to bring layers of sand and dirt down. Mm-hmm. But the deposits that build over time essentially preserve the historical sediments prior to that. And so sedimentologically, you have very neat layers, and some sites are just conducive to that. That's what made Meadowcroft Rock Shelter such a remarkable excavation, because the state of the preservation, barring a few rodents, part of the way that they actually found artifacts at that site and knew it was a site of significance had been that there had been, I think, gophers or some kind of rodent that had burrowed, as they do, and they had, in their burrowing, turned up some flint flakes. And one of the site property owners saw these and realized, oh, wow, okay, well, we've got an archaeological site. The gopher says so, So that happens.
That's fun. Yeah, I like that.
But and again, this is an argument of the skeptics that, which, I mean, it's an argument that should be raised. It doesn't happen that often, but it is possible for, a rodent burrowing to, as he's digging a hole, an artifact may fall, and then it may be redeposed into a lower strata than it actually originates from, you see. But largely at Meadowcroft Rock Shelter, the sediment layers are incredibly well preserved. Now, again, you might argue differently at other sites, and I think we got a break coming up, so I should probably...
We did. Thank you for doing that for me. See, that's what's so nice about working with another KGRA host.
Yeah.
So anyway, we're going to go to our first and only break tonight. This is Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now on KGRA Radio. If you have any questions during the live stream tonight, you can go to Facebook and YouTube and comment there and join the community. And of course, if we show images and you're watching the stream rather than listening, you'll get to see those images as well. So hang on. And when we get back, I have to, even though he's a healthy skeptic, I have to ask him about alien intervention and ancient sites, just because. This is Alan B. Smith on Paranormal Now. We'll be right back.
On and again, the signs keep on coming, they point to the end, but I hold on so tight.
Mainstream media's most wanted. KGRAradio.com.
Lost in a bad way, I've gotta let you go. You're supposed to be so close to me, I'm mostly let go.
Welcome back to Paranormal Now. This is Alan B. Smith, your most grateful host. Taking us out of the break was music by Septembrio. If you want to find out more about Septembrio, just go to Septembrio, spelled with a Y, septembrio.com. And a little bit later in this show, we're going to open up the friendly phone line so you can call in and ask Micah Hanks your questions, and that's in the last half hour. Those are the Paranormal Radio app lines, and the number is 855-472-5483 or 85-KGRA live. And as usual, please sign up for our telepath. If you want to get the best and most up-to-date information on all that's going on in the paranormal world, go to the KGRA radio website and sign up and get those notifications every week. So we're back with Micah. So Micah, I will jump back into the more conservative archaeology, but I have to ask you, when people discuss archaeological sites like in Machu Picchu, for instance, where the stone cutting is so precise, and some of the shapes of the rocks just look almost molded or odd in a way. Are you open to the possibility that there's either some high technology or alien technology involved there?
High technology, yes, more so than the alien component, which is a strange thing, I guess, for people to kind of wrap their head around if they're interested in what I do, because I'm best known maybe for scientific advocacy of the UFO or UAP phenomena. I know you for UFO, but, again, and this is one reason I actually threw my hat into the ring, and joined the ranks of the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. I really profoundly respect the work of that organization and its members, Rich Hoffman, of course, my good friend, and Robert Powell, many others. But it was a real privilege to be invited to join that organization, and now I'm a member. That organization, again, tries not to look at UAP as necessarily being this or that. We are going to study the phenomena as we would study anything in nature without any kind of preconceptions about what it may be or its sources may be. Similarly with archaeology, I could look at UFOs and I can say there's a phenomena there. I will maintain that, but I don't ascribe any kind of source to it in the absence of any additional evidence. Well, same with archaeology. And I would further state with archaeology that if a convincing argument can be made, however extraordinary the achievement, that humans built it, there is no need for the idea that aliens intervened, if that makes sense.
So is there any ancient site that you think may have been constructed by high technology that has just been forgotten?
It's certainly the case that there is evidence of high technology. Anyone who tries to dispute that, I simply say, look at the Antikythera mechanism. This may have been a one-off, but ladies and gents, we have clockwork technology, an early computer that was in use, in the the period of antiquity. That was a game changer because it showed us that, we really should expect the unexpected. And I am always thinking, when is the next Antikythera mechanism going to turn up? Mm-hmm. When are we going to find another machine that really changes the way that we think about things? But, again, the other thing, though, that we have to remember about ancient cultures is that the way that they related to nature, the way that they observed nature, and the technologies that they developed that allowed them to track or to use nature to their benefit, were very different from what we use today. And unfortunately, I'll often see people, especially with, the enigmatic nature, of ancient Egyptian culture. They tend to look at the pyramids and these ancient monuments, and even those who would say unequivocally, these are human constructions, this is human technology, they still look at it and they go, why go to all the trouble? The problem is you can't look at those cultures and their achievements through modern eyes and expect to understand what was going on in their mind, why they saw the significance of building that. We have some ideas, again, next to the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh, the pyramid texts are among the oldest writings of religious significance that we actually have, archaeologically speaking, historically speaking. But that still gives us only a limited perspective, you see. We don't know what their life was like, what it was truly like to live in those times. Now, fortunately, we also have the writings of those like Herodotus that give us, glimmering of an idea.
Some idea, but not a total idea.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, it's a very incomplete picture. And of course, you add to the fact that they're, dog-headed humans or, headless, humanoids with eyes on their chests, all kinds of crazy stuff that shows up in Herodotus's work. It raises the question of how much of it can we really take seriously. But I'll say this, I very much enjoy reading what Herodotus, again, remembered as the first historian. I love his writings on ancient Greece and Egypt,
Well,
it's the closest I can come, Alan, to time travel, right?
Right. Well, as Peter Jackson's version of Gandalf in The Hobbit says, every good story deserves a little embellishment.
Surely.
And
Tolkien did some of that too.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So in good tradition. And coincidentally, the T-shirt I'm wearing, Born Equal, a documentary that my wife and I made, you made me think of one of the our featured interviewees in that documentary, Richard Wandel, historian. He worked at the LGBT Center here in Chelsea in New York as a librarian and archivist. And what he was explaining as an example of how we, look at things through the lens of modern eyes, that it's very problematic. And he was explaining that the idea for quite some time was that women in ancient Greece were basically nothing. Yeah. And I'm kind of paraphrasing here. And that now we're discovering that, okay, maybe, again, paraphrasing, there wasn't feminism. They weren't feminists. They weren't, equal to men, but they certainly had more roles than our ancestors would have led us to believe. And is that because they sort of, edited how they interpreted history? And now modern people are looking back at it and going, wait a minute, that's not right. They did do more. And I think that's interesting because that can go both ways. The lens in which we look at history, it could be either bias or we can reinterpret history as it was passed down to us and discover more truth that way as well.
There's a good argument there that you make for the reinterpretation of certain aspects of history, because often I think that what's really happening is it's, filtered through, yet again, this really comes back to everything we were just saying about Egypt. It is filtered through the ideas and the cultural standards of, today. For instance, we look at once the Clovis culture is identified, in the 1930s, throughout the 40s and 50s, depictions of what the Clovis culture would have been like are a bunch of naked barbarians with spears, murdering proboscideans, mammoth and the, and other kinds of megafauna that existed in North America at that time. They're out there just, doing everything they can to murder these large animals. And you never see women depicted in that kind of art, except for when they're running and cowering behind these big, brutish He-Man the Barbarians, with their stone axes and knives. Yeah, well, again, call back to J.M. Adovasio with his work. He wrote a fantastic book about this, which really anyone interested in archaeology should read. It's called The Invisible Sex. And he's saying, who's to say that, women didn't play a more significant role in the ancient past? Again, we completely flood the way we perceive this with our own image. But he says, who are the flint knappers? If the guys are out there hunting all day, who's got time to create these beautiful, the artisanry that we see with these stone projectiles? Again, my good friend Jason Pentrail, co-founder with me of the Seven Ages Research Associates, he's long advocated the position that it makes more sense that the artisan flint knappers would have been the female members of these groups. Adovasio is saying, what about the clothing that was worn? What about nets that would have been used? Because we always find projectile points that could be used to kill large animals, but the abundance of small animals, you really think that they weren't eating the rabbits and the deer and the things like that. So, what kind of technology was used to capture? And then again, let's look at also rather than the hunting, but the gathering side. Who's out there gathering the food? Who's gathering the berries? Who's gathering the fresh, shoots of different edible plants? Who's cooking at home? The role of women in archaeology, it may have been overlooked in the past, but it is incredibly prevalent when we look at it with the right kind of mindset and we actually see, my gosh, women carried us throughout time and brought us to this point. So I love the modern perspective on archaeology, which is so much more inclusive in that regard. And it really does show us, I think more importantly, in addition to recognizing, the importance of all people, it also shows us that it's incumbent upon us from time to time to rethink what we think we know about the past, right?
Right. Yeah, I suspect that they were much more holistic than are often portrayed. If anyone who knows someone who worked and lived on a small managed family farm, the woman and the men, they all know how to do most of what the other can do. Now, dimorphism, the man is just built to be, more muscular and bigger boned and stronger. And so there are roles naturally that men take, right? That's biology. But
True.
but as a culture, a woman may know how to make a spear point, right? An arrowhead, but the man probably knew how to, maybe not as well, or maybe he did. We don't know exactly. But it seems to me when it's a matter of survival, the more skills that you have, the better off you are. And in that farm setting, the small farm setting, in that tribal setting, it's just passed down. You learn from your grandma, your grandfather, your father, your mother, your sister, your brother. All those skills rub off. So I think that there's probably the occasional woman hunter, that was good, skilled, strong, and that was what she did. Maybe she was the exception, but I think that's totally fine, right? And to believe. And I think that there are probably men who, stayed and made clothing. We've covered the idea of two-spirit people in Native American history. That they were, or badashes is probably a term that more people are familiar with, that they would, almost like their version of transsexual or transgender, without the actual physical transgendering, they would behave in these roles of the opposite sex. And that was normal. It wasn't a big deal. So I think that's a really interesting thing because, and I don't know when you're looking at the Clovis sites, because there's so little, what you can take from that and how much you can interpret. Because again, even though history is teaching us to look at things differently, I'm right now I'm projecting onto what could be. I don't really know, but I think we have to be open-minded about possibilities.
We certainly do, but I mean, if you look at various cultural groups, that, for instance, still practice shamanism today, often you see a shaman fills a role in the culture of these groups that is neither male nor female. Even if they are male or female, traditionally they would be male, but they almost operate in a genderless kind of capacity. So, I think that really we can look at the work of archaeological luminaries, who have again made the argument that if we want to understand certain aspects of the ancient world, it's incumbent upon us to live alongside cultures that still operate in a very similar way in the modern world today. That will give us a very good idea probably of what we can expect of the ancient past. And again, you see those sorts of elements. It's not the He-Man kind of artistic depictions that we saw of the early last century. It's anything but, and it's usually in its own way as diverse and as nuanced as anything we would see in Western society or anywhere else in the world today.
Well, I'm going to put this up because this isn't actually a curse word. But for those who may be offended, look away. But here's a question from Old Dude: politically correct BS on KGRA, and I suspect he's referring to our open-mindedness that a woman could do things a man can do or a man can do a woman. But we know historically that's a fact. Am I wrong in that? Because that's what my research has shown.
I'm sorry, old dude. We're talking about archaeology here,
right? And that's a science, right? There's documentation, evidence.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I will make no apology for those who fail to understand the archaeological significance of what we're talking about here. This isn't politically correct. I have my own issues with political correctness. What we're talking about here.
Me too.
What we're talking about here, don't mistake it for that. And if you do, I'm so sorry. But again, I make no apology on my part. What we're talking about here is archaeology and the necessity for understanding what people actually did in the ancient past and not filtering that through our own. See, that's a great example of what we're talking about, the problem. When you can't see past your own worldview and you won't, again, understand the broader problem. Now, again, I'm not trying to attack anybody, so don't get upset. Old dude, thank you for sharing your comment. I want to thank you, again, for bringing that to our attention. But it is an opportunity, I think, to learn that what we're trying to talk about here is broaden our perspective and look at what history actually teaches us, not what we want to make of what history says.
Right. And that's a challenge. It's not easy. And it's certainly not perfect. So let's continue on. Let's get back to the pre-Clovis site. And so what other evidence tumbled down the gopher holes or
Well, when it comes to Topper, a very important thing to keep in mind, again, I already kind of, before we went to the break, if we can consider that at Topper 20,000 years ago, somebody was there, at one time that would have seemed very controversial. Now, my contention, of course, Alan, is that, well, with other discoveries at sites, geographically well enough removed from Topper, but nonetheless on the North American and also in South America, but, especially on the North American continent, if they seem to be showing the same thing, then we absolutely have to take into consideration the idea that it's not unusual. Again, Galt in Texas, 21,000 years old, artifacts and whatnot. We've got similar sites like Buttermilk Creek. Of course, we already mentioned Meadowcroft Rock Shelter. We can go up to Alaska and we see Bluefish Caves. We can go to any number of other sites. Of course, if we go outside of the United States, but nonetheless still in North America, we've got a Mexican site of significance, El Fin del Mundo. We've got, of course, heading further south into South America, sites like Pedra Pintada and Pedra Furada, which some dispute, but nonetheless, I would maintain there's a pretty convincing amount of evidence that does suggest a pre-Clovis presence there. And then again, undisputed Monteverde. But you got to keep in mind, there are two complexes there, A and B. Monteverde A and Monteverde B, and one of them, of course, actually may have radiocarbon datable material in association with a cultural presence that goes back in advance of 30,000 years ago.
What's that material?
So, well, now, first of all, you got to keep in mind, radiocarbon datable material is going to be organic material, which may not necessarily be something that was worked by human hands, but most often what it is charcoal from a fire, right? So you have a hearth or a fire pit. You may also find something that is radiocarbon datable, but again, in a stratigraphic association with artifacts, okay, that allows us to date. If you find this here, and here's the radiocarbon datable material, you have a good idea of what the date of this is. Okay, so, but at Monteverde B, again, there is a compelling argument to be made that there was a human presence there maybe 32 to 35,000 years ago. Now, again, please keep in mind that site complex is the focus of more recent excavations. And speaking with Dr. Tom Dillahay, along with my colleague Jason Pintrail earlier this year, he had said, for his own part, the idea that there's a human presence in North America that far back is, a little further out there for him. But again, I would argue, with full respect to Dr. Dillahay, who again, I respect. He's a giant among men, in my opinion. We are seeing more and more sites that suggest an earlier occupation like this, and so the more sites that become available that seem to suggest, 16,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, 25,000 years ago, the more likely it seems to me that, as we saw earlier in the last century, another paradigm shift of sorts may be underway. We may be looking at another kind of a shift where we have to accept that, first there was, Folsom, and then Clovis comes along and changes everything we think we know. But we may be on the cusp of now recognizing a whole new cultural manifestation that was here much earlier. And really, in truth, what that means for those like Clovis and Folsom is that, if there were people here, we aren't seeing the arrival of people. We're seeing the arrival of a technology. I mean, Alan, that's no different from, me, with an iPhone. or whatever. And let's say I've got the 6S and you've got, the X or a later model, right? The artifacts that we find, we often think of as this group of people. Where were they from? This group? No. It's the technology that they created, which is contemporaneous with the time, right? We may be known as the iPhone culture one day. I don't know. Archaeologists of the future. I dread to think what they may think of us. Who knows? Oh, I have lost your audio there, Alan.
Oh, yep, there we go. We're back.
It is.
All right, yeah. Or the social media
yes.
error, which is sometimes I'm awfully ashamed of it. I really, really am, and I hope we get through this period. But back to your point, Micah.
Yeah. No, again, yeah. So, well, the discoveries that have been forthcoming in the last few years again are strongly suggestive of what I feel it's fair to say is another paradigm shift. But again, it's interesting because I speak with those who are also a bit more hesitant. I would hesitate to call them skeptics because they obviously accept the new forthcoming data, but they see it differently from those who have advocated a sort of paradigm shift. We need to, throw out the Clovis model and say that there was pre-Clovis presence in America. Mm-hmm. There are those who also say, well, or are we just saying that, this is the earliest evidence of Clovis? What we have called Clovis for a long time. Obviously, somebody was here earlier, but, they only create that technology like we're talking about. The iPhone only comes into existence at a certain point, but that doesn't mean that there weren't people here before that were walking around with flip phones, you see? Right? So, essentially, their argument would be maybe we just need to push back the boundary, but that we're still looking at the same cultural group or cultural manifestation that occurs of people coming into the Americas. Now, it gets even crazier than that.
So it's about not getting confused, right?
You're not going to not get confused.
But you can try, right?
Yeah, we can try, and there are far more controversial claims of, what one colleague of mine has referred to as failed migrations, evidence that there may have been other earlier cultural groups, maybe possibly coming from places like Europe, trying to come across Atlantic waters and into North America even earlier. Again, that's almost like, you're not supposed to even talk about that. But I get a lot of back channel chatter from archaeologists, and I mean, many of them very seriously look at that. Others are very aware of that potential, and they won't look at it because they fear what it would do to their community, to their community, but also more importantly to their careers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, okay, if you have to step back and make an assessment, where do you think the first Americans came from?
Well, the genetic evidence unequivocally shows that they came from Asia. They came across from Asia, and we know this as evidenced by the haplogroups that are present in modern indigenous American populations. There are haplogroups, and then there are the subhaplogroups, and I think that there are maybe, I don't even want to try to hazard a guess because I'm no expert in this. Again, I've read a lot about it, but I don't profess to be an expert. Mm-hmm. But there are dozens and dozens of subhaplogroups, right? The study of haplogroups, I believe, dates back to the 1970s, and I think it was among, I want to remember which different tribal group it had been, but there had been a prevalence of blood diseases among this group, and they wanted to try and understand genetically what might be the cause for this. And so, again, the identification of the different haplogroups results from this study. Now, there have been some interesting conjectures raised about missing haplogroups, a so-called haplogroup X, and this has been talked about for years, which does show up in certain indigenous American populations. Some have put forward the argument that one of these subhaplogroups might have origins among, for instance, the Basque, or again, what would be the region that is inhabited by the Basque in modern times. So if we're talking about, if we were to go back, for instance, 20,000 years ago, and we look at a culture, again, one that has been proposed as being a group that could have at very least made it to North America, even if they didn't leave any kind of, if they didn't stay here, if they didn't interact with other people who might have been here or might have arrived later, even if they only came here and then they left. A proposed group that may have been to America is, of course, the Solutreans. This involves a very controversial hypothesis known as the Solutrean hypothesis. Unfortunately, when it first came around, it had been associated due to the fact that it had been advocated and adopted by white nationalists. And so it unfortunately had really been kind of,
co-opted.
Yeah. But in more recent years, and this is why I always like to make the distinction between the initial pseudo-archaeological idea and then the modern proponents of that idea. The late Dennis Stanford of the Smithsonian Institute, I mean, he's one of the most respected archaeologists prior to his untimely death just a couple of years ago. He passed away due to cancer, but Dennis Stanford is a recognized expert in Paleo-Indian archaeology in North America. His colleague, Dr. Bruce Bradley, whom I have spoken with my colleagues. Yet again, I got to pay credit to my pal Jason Pendrell for lining up that interview. Had a great conversation with Dr. Bradley. And it's so sad that more people don't sit down and have this conversation with him, because I mentioned the Galt site in Texas. A fantastic site, and it's been all over the news. There have been all kinds of science papers over the last several years about this site. Dr. Bradley has been one of the archaeologists who, in a joint operation, has helped to oversee operations going on at that site because he is so well respected. It just so happens he also co-authored a book with the late Dennis Stanford that said, again, my expertise, not mine, but Dr. Bradley's, is the Paleolithic cultures of Europe. I know they're auriculate forms, the laurel leaf shape that is the Solutrean, variety of projectile. I asked him this. I said, if you saw that anywhere in the world, do you feel like you could confidently identify it? And he said, yes, I do. Well, they have turned these sorts of, projectile points that they identify with the Solutrean culture, what they believe to have been, again, a good example of Solutrean artisanship. These have been dredged off the coast of the Delmarva Peninsula, out there, brought up in association with mammoth fossils. There are some other examples that have been found also. But to me, I don't see why that's so controversial, especially in light of other discoveries we're finding. But now coming back to your main question, where do I think people in North America come from? There is no question, based on the genetic evidence, we know where people came from. And again, their provenance is in Asia, and they are the first Americans. But I think that there is archaeological evidence, though, that at least suggests that they're probably around the same time that those early arrivals from Asia were making their way into America, that there may have been other people who, at very least, even in what you might call that failed migration idea I mentioned earlier, people were getting around. And they probably came from other places, too. I mean, we always underestimate people's ability to get around in the ancient world. That seems to be the real problem.
Right. So three questions. So in regard to the haplogroup, the Basque, just the language alone, we know that it's unique, and so maybe it's not coincidental, right? That there's a special blood connection there to a special language, and are there? Okay, so the Olmecs, right? There's a lot of speculation as to who they were and where they came from. Is there any evidence that they could belong to a haplogroup, or do we have an unknown haplogroup, or do we have a genetic evidence already of who they were?
The Olmec, as I understand it, I don't think that we have any kind of, to my knowledge, I'm no expert on the Olmec, but I don't think that there is any genetic information that we have available. The Olmec, again, there are still some questions about who they were. And then the later cultures, of course, who come along and who actually build onto some of their existing structures in the region, in Mesoamerica. I mean, that is sort of still a mystery, but I don't think that there's a good argument that could be made that we could connect them with, Europe or anything along those lines. Now, there are some discoveries of, again, the identification of this so-called haplogroup X, has turned up in traces of genetic information that we have been able to discern. I believe that the Wendover Bog people at a site in the southeastern United States, this was a site that actually did produce genetic material. I mean, it was quite remarkable because in the preservation that occurs in a bog environment like that, the same with the European bog people, as they're sometimes referred to, it's a remarkable state of mummification sometimes in these peat bogs. The Wendover Bog site, they were literally able to get the remnants of again, gray matter, I guess, actual brain tissue from the interior of one of the skulls. And my understanding is that the haplogroup X was actually found there among the Wendover Bog people.
Yeah,
and
so I just wonder if there are groups that did travel around, not just the Vikings, but maybe Europeans, Africans, Asians, anywhere that have really traversed the entire planet and had made stops here and there, and then maybe because you would assume that if that were the case, that somewhere along the line someone got sick and was laid to rest on those grounds. So is it possible, do you think, that we'll find some rare and random, preserved remains of a genetic group that shouldn't be here, according to convention?
It's entirely possible. I mean, we don't ever know. There are some interesting stories, especially from the 19th century antiquarian period, of men full suited in armor that were removed from mounds. The problem with a lot of those reports, though, is that, first of all, there's absolutely no archaeological evidence actually in the form of artifacts, what was removed from said excavation that substantiates this. Sometimes the descriptions I've noticed that were given of what may be made to sound in those antiquarian accounts like something of European provenance, actually describing something distinctly Native American. Okay. The other thing too is that there are instances where it's very clear that there were things that were actually placed within mounds associated with the mound building cultures, the Mississippian culture, et cetera, Adena culture in North America. There were archaeological hoaxes that were actually placed within these so as to try and give the apparent presence of an earlier arrival from Europe. And again, a lot of this goes back to prior to the institution of the Smithsonian. We had, an antiquarian group that was based, I believe, in southern Iowa that was called the Davenport Society. Some of the members of this antiquarian group, were very much the proponents of there being a European group that had come over earlier and that they were the mound building cultures. Again, it was unfortunate because they were trying to essentially rewrite history and take that history away from the actual Native American groups that were building these mounds. Let me tell you something.
People are still do to some degree, but I think
yeah.
But they're not the loudest voice, right? I mean,
no, they're not. They shouldn't. Yeah. They shouldn't be. Again, the archaeology is very well established. I've been to so many of these mound sites myself in the Southeast. I mean, most, if not all, well, not all, because unfortunately, we a couple of years ago, the Seven Ages guys and I were circumvented by a hurricane, and some of the sites that we wanted to visit, we weren't able to get to. But again, the true story of the mounds. Fortunately, we do know it. We do know the true story of the mound cultures. Again, the archaeology is very well known. The problem is that so much of the archaeological evidence that would tell us a deeper story, and perhaps, again, something that's always intrigued me, Alan, to what extent did these cultures, in archaic times, again, pre-Columbian times in North America, to what extent did they interact with and exchange? Might it have been that the Mississippian culture, for instance, had interactions, with Mesoamerican cultures? Now, here's the thing. There have been artifacts retrieved from certain sites, Spiro Mound, for instance, that are suggestive of that. But such sites were so badly looted in the early days of their discovery, again, that people went in there literally sometimes with dynamite and blew holes in the ground and just took what they could, and God knows where that stuff went. But once it's taken and it's sold on a black market, its temporal relationship is no longer easily established. Even if someone says this came from Spiro Mound, first, how do we ever know that? Second, we know so little apart from what we might be able to associate through symbols.
Why did people blow up holes in pyramids and archaeological sites? It's just, because even archaeologists were not, the most delicate, some years ago. And did they just not understand what the information they were losing, or is it about notoriety?
Well, no. It's fundamentally because people are lazy. I could take a shovel and spend all day digging, but if I can blow a hole, a 6x7, in the ground, that really removes a lot of earth real quickly and gives me a nice head start. You talked about the pyramids. I guess you're referencing Howard Weiss, who went into the pyramids at Giza and did the same thing. He literally took dynamite and removed stone from the passageways with dynamite, ladies and gentlemen, in the pyramids. Yeah.
I mean, that's so really irresponsible.
Yeah, and so sadly, there are those today who would actually try to say that archaeologists aren't scientists and that it's a very imperfect science. I can assure you that the archaeology of the 19th century, or what they called archaeology then, really the antiquarian efforts of that era, it's nothing like what archaeologists do today, which is a very scientific area of study. And yes, science is absolutely an integral part of that. And first, I should also add that, archaeology isn't just people going out there and digging a one by one and bagging and tagging everything that they find. I mean, archaeologists increasingly over time work more and more with geologists, and they're working with a variety of other scientists in different disciplines who complement the work that is being done at archaeological sites. Anybody who says that archaeology isn't science, or isn't science, they don't understand what archaeology is. Maybe they don't understand science either.
Well, I think you're right. I think they don't understand science, because science is a living thing.
Yeah.
Like you have these debates with climatology and all that kind of stuff. It's information, measurements are not always perfect, right? And geologists probably know this the best. It's very difficult. In the early days of geology, it took them a long time to really get a sense of timelines.
Yeah.
And that's because you move from one area, like you're saying, to another, and something's amiss. Well, why is this layer so much deeper? Well, once you learn about the living Earth and how it changes and morphs, then you have to update your science, and science does update. Archaeology,
it should.
I think for many of the listeners out there, is a little slow to come around on, like you were kind of saying in the beginning. The older the timeline gets, the slower they are to embrace it. But that's the conservative responsibility of science, right?
It is, but I see that in a lot of different disciplines. I even encounter that, in like UFO research and stuff. I remember years ago when I first started trying to kind of get away from UFO research, and I was like, I want to go get involved in more respectable science. So I go to, get involved in archaeology, and the guys and I are, getting to know archaeologists, and very quickly it became evident to me that all the same little human problems, ego and attitudes, and paradigms and all this sort of stuff. I mean, it's as present there as it is anywhere that you expect to go and look. And what we have really, I think, although archaeologists really might consider what they do a variety of social science, I guess it is. As social scientists, maybe we can just look at this and say, this is human behavior, right? It's not one science or one group or division or practice or whatever. This is just how people behave, and until we've got AI that's out there digging in the dirt for us and processing the information, this is always going to be a part of this, right? Just trying to dig through the little attitudes and wade through all the egos. It's always going to be there.
All right, if you're just tuning in, I'm talking to Micah Hanks, and wow, great conversation, Micah. So we're going to open up the phone lines. If you want to call in and ask Micah your question, the Paranormal Radio app phone line is 855-472-5483 or 85-KGRA. Live, call in. Bill, Skywatcher, our producer, will queue you up, and we'll bring you on, and you can ask your questions. So again, to call in, the clock is ticking. We have 855-472-5483. So yeah, Michael, we have to touch on the UFO phenomena a little bit.
Sure.
And so I'll tell you why I like the UFO rather than UAP. I like it because there's a cultural provenance and history behind it. And I'm very comfortable with the marriage of pop culture with the serious research. So I think culturally, it's why not just stick with UFO? And then for those who are researchers or the military, if they want to use UAP, that's fine. Or do you think that we really should change our verbiage, and we should say UAP and let go of the UFO.
Well, it's tricky because I can relate to what you're saying about UFO. But, you know, the way I would see this is the UFO phenomenon. I mean, I still use that term. I almost use UFO and UAP interchangeably. I never got to a point where I started saying, well, henceforth, we're going to have to say UAP. Now, again, the organization that I mentioned earlier, the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, which I prefer, even though I'm a member, I'm an associate member, and I almost prefer to, refer to them as a organization I support even more than I, claim to be a part of, because I'm recent, I've recently joined, and one must earn their creds, right?
Wait, so is that why you're biased against UAP?
No, it's not. But again, I have to respect. But again,
of course,
with that, yeah. I know. But with respect to my colleagues, I have to respect their reason for wanting to use UAP in the furtherance of the scientific dialogue that they're trying to bring to this debate. Now, again, back to your point, I do still, like you, use UAP and UFO interchangeably, and I will acknowledge the use of UAP in that more scientific context, and especially with relation to my colleagues when they use it, versus my general, what we might call colloquial use of the term UFO, because like you say, people know what that means. That has been in use since at least around 1952, I believe, when Ruppelt probably first proposed that be used as opposed to flying saucer. But again, if we really look at the history, this is no different from archaeology in the sense that you could look at the evolution of UFOs, the terminology used to describe them, and how that has shaped the way that we think UFOs are, for instance, supposed to look. You can apply that to what we've already been talking about with archaeology. You got stratigraphic layers, and I identify this as being a woodland archaic, and then this is the Folsom layer here, and then a little deeper I've got, the Clovis, and then we've got what we might call pre-Clovis below that. Well, we've got UAP here today, and then we've got UFO right here, and then just a little before that we've got flying saucer. They don't all represent different phenomena, do they? No. But these are different terms that have been applied to the same phenomena that remains and has remained little understood. But what's really interesting is that you could go even deeper. Oh, well, the UFOs arrived with the flying saucers in 1947. Well, what about the Foo Fighters? Right? Sure, and if we go further into the Fortean literature, we go back into the 1930s. Actually, this is after the Fortean period. During the Fortean period, but after Charles Fort. We have the so-called ghost flyers in Scandinavia, which were a sort of predecessor to the so-called ghost rockets that appear immediately after the war in the summer of 1946. Prior to that, we do have in the Fortean literature, Charles Fort did quite a lot of categorizing and cataloging of aerial phenomena, but he had no term like UFO.
Or airships, was often
in the 1890s, and Fort did write about those a good bit. But again, even in advance of the airship wave of the 1890s, and there were other airship waves, mind you. In England, there was another one that happened about a decade later. Charles Fort had gone even further back and had cataloged all kinds of aerial anomalous phenomena that there was no name for. Again, airship is interesting because in the 1890s, we do yet again have a sort of a name or a general term that we begin to apply to it,
Right.
So I would argue that just like with archaeology, and we have to dig deeper if we want to go find that pre-Clovis or anything earlier. I mean, UFOs, I keep having this conversation with people. Is this really a phenomenon that we can recognize as having arrived in 1947? I don't think so. And even if we can really only say that the same phenomena as observed after the war, even if we can only really say that maybe began to appear during or shortly before the Second World War, we really have to rethink, when we think it arrived and what we think it is and what we, how we describe it. Now, again, flying saucer. Look on your app. If you've got an iPhone, ladies and gents, do this at home right now. Pull open your phone. Type in UFO. Okay, cool. I type in UFO, and what happens? That little flying saucer emoji pops up. Yeah, you got that little emoji. Well, who says that's what a UFO looks like? Okay, well, here's who said that is what a UFO looked like. It was the journalists back in the 1940s who were describing not what he saw, but how Kenneth Arnold said it flew like a saucer skipping across the water. How much of what we think we know is really what it actually is.
Right. Well, There have been eyewitness accounts that have described multiple shapes and descriptions of what a UFO is,
including discs and saucers,
including discs and saucers and cylinders and triangles. Orb. It's all out there, and so I just think that it's a fun cultural term it's going to stick around just because at this point, hats, T-shirts, this and that. If you and I, we're having a conversation walking down the street and we're talking about UAPs, the average person, they're not going to even like look at us. But if you and I were talking out loud about UFOs, you might get a head turn, right?
Yeah,
and so I just don't know if UAP will ever supplant that. But maybe, like you said, historically, it very well could, because UFO was used by the military. That's why civilian investigators used it.
Well, but now UAP was used by the military as well. I mean,
That's true.
If you go back and you read the Air Force documentation, I think going all the way back to Project Sign, one of the predecessors of Blue Book, I mean, you see unidentified aerial phenomena being described even that far back. By the way, Renee Cruz there in the chat says 1897, a UFO windmill crashed and they buried the extraterrestrial alien in a Catholic cemetery. It was actually a Masonic cemetery. I've been to that cemetery. I've been to the site of the purported crash. And that's a very interesting story. There's still a historical placard at that cemetery that says that there was an alleged airship crash that occurred there. Now, there's nothing that supports that, unfortunately. There's nothing in the way of evidence, archaeological or otherwise, that supports that. But the late researcher Jim Mars, I actually was at that cemetery with Jim Mars one time and a few others. And he brought a photograph of the purported headstone, which wasn't really a headstone, but the story goes that there was a rocket that in that cemetery that featured this kind of a strange triangle or diamond sort of shaped thing. And I'd always heard that story about that headstone and never could see a good photograph of it. Well, Jim brought a color photograph, and I've got a picture of him holding the color photograph. So it apparently did exist at that location at one time. I can assure you it's no longer there, but I mean, I've been to that Masonic.
And so everyone listening, Aurora, I believe, is what we're speaking of, correct? In Texas.
That is in Aurora, Texas.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I was fortunate to go down there. I don't know if you know Ken Cherry, but he's a good friend of mine. And so I visited Ken. We went down there to hang out. And but again, it's one of those things where it's like, it's just fun. It's cool to have a little place to go and reflect on the ideas, the possibilities, and I think that's okay. And that's what I mean by, embracing the cultural side of all this, because if you are a nose to the grindstone researcher and you take this field very seriously, it's still to your benefit that the culture at large opens up, even if it's playfully, to the idea, and it creates conversation.
There's something to be said for that, yeah.
Yeah, for all the critique one can give Ancient Aliens, it has certainly exposed a lot of people and created conversation that otherwise certainly didn't exist at the numbers that we have now.
That's true. I spoke with Giorgio Tsoukalos a number of years ago, and I remember him telling me that he couldn't count how many young people came to him and said, I'm an archaeological student. And I got to hand it to him. I've experienced this myself, even though I'm not an advocate of the so-called ancient alien hypothesis. But I mean, I've met Giorgio. I know, for instance, a lot of those guys pretty well. I mean, I've traveled a good bit with David Hatcher Childress, Ramon Searcher, who is the wonderful assistant of Eric von Daniken. I've traveled with those guys too, and I count Ramon among one of my dearest friends. He is a wonderful guy who's just as interested in the archaeological side of all this as the other side of it too. But again, I've experienced that myself. Like Giorgio had said that, I'll be at an event with the Seven Ages guys, grad student will come up and they'll be like, I'm now a serious archaeologist. What got me into this was Ancient Aliens. And a lot of them are like, it's still a guilty pleasure. I love watching that show. I mean, so I have to ask, because I also know a lot of archaeologists who are like, look how damaging this show is. Look how wrong. Look at all the misinformation. Okay, sure. There's that side of it. I mean, I would say more than it being damaging and dangerous, that it's really just a lot of it very silly and extremely hokey. I mean, and also just flat wrong. But but it gets a lot of people into looking at the past. And so Giorgio made that point years ago. I've experienced that myself. I know a lot of grad students who are serious archaeologists today because of Ancient Aliens. I mean, I'm not making up a story. I mean,
no, I know.
This has happened many times. They'll come up and they're just all like, this is what got us into it. Are you into all that? And I'm like, I don't really follow all that now.
No, but it's fantastic. I love it. So we've got a question here from Rodrigo. Does Micah want disclosure, or does he enjoy the UFO mystery as it is?
I think Rodrigo and I follow each other on Twitter. So hello, Rodrigo. And if disclosure is anything that can be had, I would naturally want that. I'm not a fan of the idea of the suppression of information for the sake of suppressing information. I just am not 100% convinced that the government has significant amounts of information that they're withholding about the UFO phenomena. Now, they very well may. I don't know. What I'm saying is I'm not convinced that they are withholding significant amounts of information. And if they are, again, then maybe it would be good if that information be made available to the public, and therefore, we could perhaps benefit in terms of energy systems or other kinds of technological breakthroughs that may help life on Earth. That would really be a good thing, I think. But it remains to be seen if the government is withholding such information and if it's going to be forthcoming. I do know this, that with the UAP task force, we supposedly going to be seeing a report. Well, I won't hold my breath, but I remain hopeful.
Yeah, I mean, come on, it's a step in the right direction. And once again, you have a larger swath of the public now that is entertaining the idea, or if not taking it seriously now. And they perhaps didn't 6 months, 2 years ago. And that's fantastic. If it comes out in the paper, the government has a UFO task force, that's great.
Certainly.
And so we're definitely making some strides. You always hear people say, these are all signs we're moving towards disclosure. I've always doubted that, because I feel like we had Project Blue Book for quite a while. And that was supposedly an open investigation, right? And so for decades, people have said disclosure is right around the corner. I see the signs, and then it never happens. Do you think it'll happen?
Here's what I would like to see. Okay, I don't mean to. I'm not trying to dodge your question, but I would like to rephrase it.
Sure. Yeah.
Opposed to relying on government for quote unquote disclosure, what I would love to see is a government agency like NASA, or another agency, be awarded a contract for a Blue Book style study into UAP. But with the modern conventions at our disposal, which include, of course, technologies like the Raytheon at-FLIR forward targeting pod, which seems to have already been successful on more than one occasion, and at very least gathering footage and other data in support of the existence of unidentified aerial phenomena, or UFOs. So I would love to see a unbiased scientific effort with government funding like Blue Book. And again, it's funny, I was on Twitter a while back saying, why aren't more scientists looking at UFOs? We need studies like this. And somebody kind of hit me up and said, this is a pipe dream. It's always hilarious when I see people like you saying that the government would ever give funding to, academic institutions. And I said, are you familiar with the Condon Committee, the University of Colorado UFO project from 1966, which was concluded in 68, but the Air Force awarded a contract to the University of Colorado, and even though they came out with a skeptical conclusion and it had some, fairly severe cultural effects,
it was
right. But my point is that yes, the government has funded UFO projects by independent academic organizations outside of government. It's not a crazy pipe dream. It's happened in the past. I think it should happen again. But what I would love to see is, again, have government funding for I said NASA previously, but again, something more along the lines of the Condon, project in modern times may be better. Government funded, but outside of government, but open and freely available, with a report that will be, again, I don't have any guarantee that this UAP task force and the report, if they produce it, that's going to be made available to the public. But again, the Condon Committee heck, you could buy a mass market paperback edition of their report.
Yeah.
We need something like that, but with the technology at our disposal today. And Condon himself, Alan, said, my team and I, in our findings, we don't say that there should never be further UFO study, simply that right now, in 1968, science isn't benefiting from it. We aren't furthering our knowledge of science from studying these things. But he says we don't close the book, and in fact, we encourage future studies. Maybe it's time for future study, don't you think?
I think so. I have to get this in before we go, Micah. I'm a fan of Hellier, the documentary series. It was great to see you in that. What do you think about their work?
Oh, I love Greg and Dana, and they I've got a spider on my microphone here too, so a little guy hanging out with me in the studio tonight. Yeah, he's very tiny. I doubt anyone at home can see him, but Greg and Dana, I've known them for years now. It was a surprise. I didn't know I was going to be in Hellier. That was filmed, I think, back in late 2012, and so when Hellier came out, I was getting all these emails from people saying, "Look, I know this is crazy, but I'm going to be in Asheville this weekend. Can you take me up there to the cave?" And I'm like, "What?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And then I find out I'm in this documentary series called Hellier, and I had people asking about it. And so, that was interesting, but it was fun. I would love to go back up there with Greg and Dana sometime if they're ever back around, just because. But let me be clear. Again, I don't think that there's some sort of a base or anything there. That cave is very similar to like the archaeological sites that we've been talking about tonight. It's a reentrant feature. It's, a couple of slabs of like granite, and I'm sure that probably in ancient times, ancient people probably, holed up in there for the night. I don't think there's a cave base or anything like that. It's a fun story. That's what I think.
All right, Micah, thanks so much for joining tonight. I really appreciate it.
Brother, it's been great. Let's do it again.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. I feel like there's so much ground we could cover. But as always, the clock always gets us. So thank you again. This is Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now. If you want to find out more about Micah, please check out his website, micahhanks.com. All right. So everyone, the next couple of weeks, I had some scheduled changes. So I won't be with you on the 3rd. So for October 3rd, next weekend, we'll be doing a replay. And on October 7th, Caroline Corey from Superhuman, the documentary, will be joining us. And that was a really good documentary. It ties in very much so with The Field by Lynn McTaggart, if you're familiar with the science behind that. So everyone, once again, thank you to our producer, Bill Skywatcher, doing the work live and behind the scenes and before and after show. And until next time, live in the mystery.